Welcome, my midnight wanderer. Tell me where you're listening from tonight. And if you're new here, subscribe and slip into the other stories waiting for you on this channel. Breathe deeply, relax your shoulders, and loosen your jaw as we begin. Once upon a time when I was a young man, during the darkest winter, I can remember, in our remote Icelandic valley, the sun barely grazed the horizon for a few pale hours each day, leaving us with endless night and bitter cold. The mountains encircling our valley lay cloaked in snow and shadow. Sometimes the northern lights would shimmer in ghostly curtains of green and purple overhead, beautiful yet offering no warmth. If anything, their eerie glow only made the darkness feel deeper and more mysterious. My family, farmers and shepherds by trade, huddled around our turf house hearth each evening, grateful for its warmth as winds howled across the barren fields outside. The walls were thick with sod and timber, but still the winter chill crept in, and with it crept old fears and folk tales told to keep children obedient and adults vigilant. Ever since I was a small boy, I'd heard whispers of a monstrous creature that prowled these long nights. By the dim glow of an oil lamp, my mother would sit at her spinning wheel unwinding stories as she spun raw wool into yarn, her gentle face aglow in the orange light as she warned us of Jólakötturinn, the Yule Cat. According to her, this was no ordinary cat but a hulking black beast, big as a farmhouse, with eyes like glowing embers and whiskers sharp as bristles. It lurked in the snowy hills each Christmas, she said, peering into windows and sniffing around doorways. And woe to those it found wearing old tattered clothes on Yule Eve, for that meant they had been lazy or unlucky, and the Yule Cat hungered for their flesh. For me and my two younger siblings, 8-year-old Arnie and 6-year-old Rosa, these stories were both a thrill and a terror. We would draw our wool blankets tight around our shoulders as Mother spoke, our imaginations painting the Yule Cat and the shadows flickering on the walls. In her telling, the beast had a tail strong enough to topple trees and claws that could rend a man in two. It crept through the blizzard on silent paws, but if you heard a low, pitiful meow outside your door on Christmas Eve, it meant something evil was sure to happen soon. Mother insisted that there was only one defense: to wear at least one new piece of clothing on Christmas Eve. An apron, a pair of knitted socks, even a small scarf. Anything newly made or gifted would do. If all the children in a home had something new to wear, the Yule Cat would sense it and pass them by with an angry hiss. But if not, the beast would slip into the house under cover of darkness, or catch the unfortunate soul outside and devour them on the spot. Better to lose an arm to frostbite than to the Yule Cat, my grandmother used to mutter. She claimed the monster had prowled since her own grandmother's time, always hungry, always watching for the slothful and the unfortunate. My father, on the other hand, spoke of the Yule Cat as more than a fable. To him it was a warning and a lesson. Those who don't put in their share of work, those who lie about idle, will be left with nothing new at Christmas, and thus have earned the cat's visit, he would say, fixing me with a stern, no-nonsense gaze beneath his thick brow. On our farm, everyone was expected to help process the autumn wool, spinning and knitting right up until Yuletide. The reward for our toil was a new garment for each of us when the holy night arrived. For poor families like ours, new clothes were more than a luxury. They were talismans against the darkness lurking beyond the lamplight. That particular winter had been especially cruel. A sickness in the autumn swept through our sheep flock, killing many and leaving us with far less wool than expected. My mother's knitting needles flew day and night as she tried to make socks and sweaters from what little yarn we could spin. My sister and brother would each have a new woolen garment by Christmas, however humble, a pair of mittens for Rosa and a scarf for little Arnie. But there wasn't enough wool for everyone. At 17, nearly a grown man, I insisted they not worry about me. The younger children needed their warm clothes more desperately. Secretly, though, I felt a gnawing unease. I had given up my claim to any new garment that year, thinking myself too old to fear children's stories. But Mother fretted over me, and even Father, usually so stoic, seemed to brood when he thought I didn't notice. I overheard them murmuring late one night as the wind rattled the shutters. "We have nothing new to give him," Mother whispered, voice quavering. Father responded in his low, gravelly tone. "He's a good lad. He'll be fine. That old cat won't bother with him. God will protect us." Despite his words, I could tell he was worried.
I tried to brush off these worries. After all, I told myself, the Yule Cat was just a tale to frighten children into doing their chores. Yet in our isolated community, everyone knew someone who claimed to have seen a shape in the snow or heard an eerie yowl on a midwinter night. Old Gunnar down the road swore that one Christmas, decades ago, he had lost a lamb to the Yule Cat, found the barn door torn off its hinges, and great tufts of black fur in the snow amidst the blood. Others whispered that a farmhand who disappeared one Christmas must have been taken by the cat, for his tracks led into a field and ended abruptly, with only a trail of blood and gigantic paw prints continuing from there. People said his remains were never found, only a blood-stained cap and those dreadful prints circling the spot before vanishing. These could have been just ghost stories shared after too much Brennivine, but on those endless nights before Christmas, with darkness pressing in, even a skeptic could not help but shiver. In hushed tones, some said the beast lurked up in the distant lava fields, or high among the crags of Dimmaborgir, ready to prowl whenever the winter hunger struck. Thus, as Christmas Eve approached, a quiet dread settled over our household. Outside, the sky was perpetually black and bruised with storm clouds. Inside, we moved through our chores with unusual silence. Each of us tried to dismiss the tale of the Yule Cat as just that, a tale. Yet when I caught Mother watching me, her face drawn and tight with worry, I realized none of us truly felt safe. I was the only one among us without a new garment, the sole tempting target for whatever might be out there on the darkest night of the year. In the pit of my stomach, a cold knot of fear was forming, one that no amount of logical reassurance could loosen.
Christmas Eve day arrived bleak and gray, though day was a generous word for the few hours of half-light we got. A murky dawn grudgingly illuminated the snow-cloaked fields around our farm, revealing drifts piled high against the outbuildings. The wind had calmed to an icy whisper that crept through every crack, We spent the morning in a flurry of preparation. My sister Rosa helped Mother bake flatbread in the hearth oven, the aroma of lightly charred dough briefly lifting our spirits. Little Arnie tried to adorn a small spruce branch, our makeshift Christmas tree, with slivers of dried fish skin and a few precious scraps of colored wool. I busied myself chopping firewood and hauling it inside, determined to keep the cottage as warm and bright as possible when the long night came. Despite the bustling activity, an undercurrent of tension ran through us all. I noticed Mother sneaking worried glances my way whenever she thought I wasn't looking. Father was unusually quiet as he sharpened a small axe by the woodpile, lost in thought. We all felt it, an unspoken cloud hanging over the holiday cheer. By late morning, the entire cottage was filled with the warmth of cooking and the sense of Christmas preparations. Mother rolled out rounds of dough on the floured table to make lefebvre, the traditional leaf bread, while Rosa and I used a small knife to carefully cut delicate patterns, fern swirls and starry snowflakes into each paper-thin disc. We then fried the breads in hot tallow until they were crisp and golden. Little Arnie watched with wide eyes, sneaking a bit of dough to nibble whenever Mother's back was turned. The simple rhythmic task of cutting and frying bread and the rich smell of it gave us a brief sense of normalcy. As we worked, Mother even hummed a gentle Yuletide lullaby under her breath, as if to ward away our worries with music. Around midday, a knock came at the door, startling us all. Since few visitors ventured out on this day, Father unlatched the door to find our nearest neighbor, an elderly widow named Margaret, trudging through the snow with a covered basket on her arm. She often visited during the holidays to exchange small gifts or extra provisions. Father welcomed her in, and I helped brush the snow off her cloak. Margaret's cheeks were ruddy from the cold, but her eyes were bright and shrewd. "I won't stay but a minute," she said, though we all knew she enjoyed a good chat. "I just came to bring a little something for you and the children." From her basket she produced a wheel of homemade cheese and a bundle of knitted wool socks. Mother thanked her profusely and insisted she warm herself by the fire. Margaret sat for a moment in the rocking chair, smiling as Rosa and Arnie crowded around to see what treats she'd brought. As Mother poured her a cup of hot coffee, Margaret regarded me with a kindly yet concerned expression. "And what about you, Einar?" she said, tilting her head. "Have you gotten your new clothes for Christmas?" I felt a flush creeping up my neck. "Oh, don't worry about me, Aunt Margaret," I said, using the affectionate term although we weren't related. "I'm a grown man now. New clothes aren't so important for me." Margaret tutted, unimpressed. She was from a generation that took the old Yule legends very seriously. Now, every soul in the house matters," she chided gently. "I still remember being a girl of 8, the year my new skirt wasn't finished by Christmas. You better believe I spent that night hiding under my mother's bed, thinking every cat's yowl in the wind was him." She didn't have to specify who he was. Mother and Father exchanged uneasy glances. Margaret sipped her coffee and continued. "We laughed about it later, but at the time I was scared half to death. These old tales have claws, you know." She gave a wink, perhaps to lighten the mood, but her eyes remained grave. The room felt quiet except for the crackle of the fire. "I'll be fine," I insisted, forcing a grin. I'll just borrow one of Arnie's socks. He's got an extra pair now. I gently elbowed my little brother, who giggled and held up one of his new socks proudly. But Margaret was not so easily put off. Setting down her cup, she began to dig in her basket. I've always got a spare gift or two. Let's see. Ah! She pulled out a knitted wool mitten. Just one, not a pair, newly made and striped in blue and white. It isn't much, but it's new. Take this, dear. Tuck it in your pocket if nothing else. I'd rather know you had at least that, for good fortune's sake. The mitten was clearly sized for a child's hand, likely intended for one of her young grandchildren. A lump caught in my throat at her concern. For a moment I was tempted to accept it to ease her mind, and perhaps my own, but pride and practicality won out. I gently closed her wrinkled hand around the mitten and shook my head. Thank you truly, I said softly, but give it to little Holly or Sigrid next time you see them. I have plenty of warm clothes already. I gestured to my coat and layers, worn though they were. Don't worry about me. Margaret pursed her lips, clearly unconvinced. Mother laid a hand on her arm. We'll look after him, Margaret. Don't fret, Mother said, though the strain in her voice was clear. Our neighbor sighed. Very well. Stubborn as your father you are, she muttered at me with a tiny smile. Still, as she prepared to leave, she reached up and pulled me into a quick, fierce hug. In a low voice meant only for me, she whispered, "Keep a candle lit tonight, boy, and say a prayer or two." I nodded, swallowing against the tightness in my chest. We escorted Margaret to the door and watched her step back out into the swirling snow. "Good Christmas to you, and thank you again," Father called. "Good Christmas," Margaret answered, waving as she disappeared into the white daylight. I shut the door behind her, the latch clicking back into place. Mother stood in the center of the room, twisting her apron in her hand. "Bless her heart," she murmured, "but her talk will give me nightmares." No one responded to that. Father cleared his throat and went to stoke the fire again. I noticed he took the rifle down from the wall afterward, and quietly leaned it in a corner, a subtle precaution he hoped none of us would remark upon. I gathered Margaret's gifts from the table. She had left a little blue and white mitten behind, perhaps intentionally. I hesitated, then placed it on a shelf by the door, telling myself I might carry it later. Her words echoed in my mind. These old tales have claws. I tried to shake off the feeling of foreboding they brought. We had a holiday to prepare for, and I didn't want fear to spoil it. As the afternoon waned, a heavy silence fell over our home. Each of us was alone with our thoughts, even as we stayed within arm's reach of one another. Father sat at the table, oiling the hinges of the front door and reinforcing the latch, an activity he pretended was just routine maintenance. Mother quietly laid out what modest fare we had for the evening meal. Now and then I caught her gazing toward the shelf by the door, where that lone mitten sat, her brow furrowed. As the clock neared 6, a hush fell over the house. According to custom, the church in the distant village would ring its bells at that hour to herald the official start of Christmas. We could not hear them from our isolated farm, but we observed the tradition in our own way. Father stood and cleared his throat. "It's time," he said quietly. We gathered in the main room, each of us finding a place near the glow of the hearth. Father bowed his head and led us in a simple prayer, giving thanks for making it through another year and asking for protection on this sacred night. His voice was steady, yet I saw his hand tremble slightly as he made the sign of the cross. Dinner was modest but filling, a stew of smoked lamb and root vegetables that Mother had simmered all afternoon, and the crisp flatbread we had prepared. The rich scent of the hangikjöt, smoked meat, mingled with the sweet smell of burning peat from the fire. We ate quietly at first, each lost in our thoughts, but gradually, the warmth of the food and the familiarity of the ritual brought a little comfort. Father even managed to tell a droll story about how last year one of the Yule lads, Glugagegir the window peeper, must have been sorely disappointed to find nothing but our grumpy old ram, staring back at him through the window. We chuckled softly at the image of a confused troll and a stubborn sheep in a silent standoff. After dinner, Mother unveiled the presents, such as they were. Rosa gasped in delight to receive the tiny knitted mittens Mother had managed to finish from our remaining undyed wool. They were a little coarse and uneven in color, but my sister slid them on immediately, stretching her fingers and admiring the fit. Little Arnie got a red woolen scarf which Mother had cleverly sewn from a gently used blanket. He wrapped it around his neck, face glowing as if it were the finest silk. The children's joy was infectious. Father and I clapped and laughed as they danced about to show off their new treasure. Then, all eyes turned to me. Mother's smile faltered, her hands fluttering nervously at her apron. "Einar," she began softly, guilt and sadness in her tone. She didn't need to finish. I stepped forward and wrapped her in a hug before she could apologize. "It's all right," I said gently. "I have everything I need." I pulled back and held her by the shoulders so she could see I meant it. Truthfully, my chest ached with a mix of gratitude and unease. I was grateful my siblings had their gifts, and I tried to convince myself that my own lack of one was of no consequence. But the silence in the room told us all how significant it felt. Father cleared his throat gruffly. "We'll make it up to you, son. After New Year's, I'll trade for some fine wool and your mother will knit you the best sweater in the valley." I nodded and forced a smile. "I'll hold you to that, Pabby," I replied, using the affectionate word for him. We all pretended that was the end of it. Mother wiped her eyes quickly and began collecting the empty bowls. And Father helped her, though I saw him cast a worried glance toward the darkened window. By now night had fully fallen. The world outside our door was black and still. We shuttered the windows tight, but a few errant drafts made the oil lamp flicker. In our small home, the shadows jumped and swayed on the walls, teasing the edges of our vision. Each time a shadow moved unexpectedly, I felt myself tensing, my mind conjuring images of massive feline shapes slinking through the yard. To distract the children and ourselves, Father suggested we sing a few Christmas hymns. Our voices were low but steady as we sang Heimsymbol and Natten var så agat ein, familiar carols about the holy night. The melodies filled the warm air, and for a short while the tension eased. Then Rosa, with a shy smile, started a playful song that Icelandic children often used to tease one another. A little ditty about the 13 Yule lads who caused mischief during the Christmas season. Rosa gleefully sang out verses naming each of the 13 Yule lads, and their ridiculous antics. She told of Stekjastor harassing farmers' sheep, Giljagor sneaking into barns to steal milk, Stu4 Stubby swiping the crust from pans, and Ferrislaker Spoonlicker slurping any spoon he could find. She continued through pot scraper gobbling leftovers, bowl licker lurking under beds to steal bowls, door slammer banging doors in the night, and Skyer gobbler gorging on Skyer. We couldn't help but laugh as she went on about sausage swiper snatching sausages, window peeper spying through windows, doorway sniffer sniffing outlaw for broth, meat hook hooking smoked meat with his pole, and candle stealer following children to steal their tallow candles. We all laughed at the absurd litany, the tension truly melting away. But when Rosa came to the very last line mentioning the child-eating Yule Cat, her voice faltered and an uneasy silence crept back over us. Father patted her head. "Enough of that, sweetheart," he murmured gently. "It's late for songs." I could sense the unease returning. It was indeed late now. The children were drooping with exhaustion, and truth be told I felt tired too, though my nerves hummed with a strange energy. Mother ushered Rosa and Arnie to their bed, tucking them in beneath heaps of quilts. The little ones shared a sleeping alcove built into the wall, a cozy nest where they promptly curled up together, mittened hands and red scarf visible above the covers. "Pleasant dreams and a blessed Christmas," Mother whispered, kissing their foreheads. Father latched the door firmly and slid the iron bolt. It was rare for us to lock up so securely. Usually we left the door on the latch for neighbors or in case of some need, but tonight felt different. He then took his hunting rifle down from its peg above the mantel. Checking the meager light, he quietly loaded a cartridge into the chamber. My eyes widened at that. We hardly ever had cause to use the rifle. Ammunition was expensive. There were no wolves in Iceland, no bears except the stray polar bear drifting on an ice floe, and none of those in our parts. Father caught my gaze and gave a small nod as if to acknowledge that this was merely a precaution. Neither of us said a word about it. The hour grew late. Mother sat in her rocking chair, Bible in her lap, though I don't think she was reading the words. Father poked at the fire, sending a swirl of orange sparks up the chimney. I stood by the lone window, lifting the corner of the heavy sheepskin curtain to peer out. The night was moonless. Snow clouds devoured the sky, leaving not a single star. Our yard and fields beyond lay in darkness, broken only by the faint silvery sheen of starlight reflecting on the snow. The white expanse made it possible to discern vague shapes. A fence line, the roof of our barn, the hulking outline of the haystack. All was still, perhaps too still. The usual sounds of a winter night were absent. No distant howl of wind, no restless lowing of the cows in the barn, not even the hoot of an owl. It felt as if the world was holding its breath. As I stared, a flicker of motion caught my eye near the barn. I squinted, pressing my face to the cold glass. For a heartbeat, I thought. I saw something move, something long and low to the ground, gliding around the far corner of the barn. A trick of the dim light, perhaps. I did not see it again, but I realized my heart was hammering. In that brief instant, I'd felt sure I was watching a sleek, shadowy form with two gleaming pinpoints of light for eyes. But it could not be. It was too in the night for my mind to be conjuring monsters already. I let the curtain fall and stepped back, swallowing hard. My mouth had gone dry. "Everything all right?" Mother asked softly, noticing my movement. I forced a grin. "Yes, just checking the weather," I lied. I didn't want to alarm them with what was likely my imagination playing tricks. "It's calm. Maybe we'll have clear skies by morning." Father grunted, either in agreement or simply acknowledging he heard me. He was still crouched by the fire, gazing into it with the rifle laid across his knees. I decided to step out to the attached shed to fetch a last armload of firewood. It would give me a moment to collect myself. Taking the lantern from its hook, I lit it and unbolted the inner shed door. Cold air rushed in as I entered the tiny lean-to that served as our wood storage. I shivered. The temperature had dropped further, and the air tasted of coming snow. My lantern cast a frail circle of light around me as I piled a few logs in my arms. In the quiet I found myself listening intently, my ears straining beyond the creak of the old shed. Faintly I thought I heard a sound drifting from somewhere out in the darkness. A sound so strange and subtle that at first I thought it was the wail of the wind. But the wind was silent. The noise came again, just on the edge of hearing a high-pitched cry or whine, almost like a cat's meow, drawn out and mournful. It was impossible to tell how far away it was. The night plays tricks with sound. A prickling sensation crawled over my skin. I held my breath, lantern raised, heart thudding in my chest. The cry came once more, echoing off the barn wall. This time it unmistakably resembled the mewling of a gigantic cat, not the pleasant trill of a house cat, but something deeper, sadder, and filled with hunger. Backed into the house, kicking the door shut behind me with a thud. Mother started in her rocking chair, and Father stood up quickly. "What is it?" he asked, alarmed by my wide eyes and abrupt entrance. I'm not sure," I faltered. I set the firewood down, realizing I'd nearly dropped it in my haste. Should I tell them what I heard? I felt foolish already, but my instinct screamed that this was real. Before I could speak, from outside there arose a sudden clamor of noise that made all three of us jump. It was the panicked bleating of sheep. The sound carried through the walls. Our sheep pen was on the far side of the barn, and something had clearly disturbed the flock. The animals cried out in alarm, a chorus of distress in the otherwise silent night. Father's eyes met mine across the dim room. Without a word, he strode to the door and lifted the heavy iron latch. He grabbed the lantern from my hand and yanked the door open, stepping out onto the threshold. I hurried after him, adrenaline surging, while Mother remained just inside, hovering anxious. Outside, the cold was like a slap to the face. The sheep were still bleating frantically. It sounded as if they were trying to burst out of their enclosure. My breath plumed white in the lantern light as I followed Father around the corner of the house toward the barnyard. The snow crunched under our boots, painfully loud in the dead quiet between the sheep's cries. We had about a dozen sheep left after the autumn sickness. a pitiful remnant of our flock. Father held the lantern high, and its light fell upon the low wooden fence of the sheep pen. The animals milled and stamped nervously within, their eyes reflecting tiny sparks of orange light. I saw their ears flick toward us, but they did not come at our appearance as they normally might. Something had agitated them beyond reason. One ewe was actually trying to climb up onto the backs of the others, bawling in fear. Father cursed under his breath. Could be a fox or a mink, he muttered, though it was rare for such predators to frighten adult sheep. Perhaps a starving Arctic fox had snuck near, though I doubted even that could cause such terror. We approached the pen slowly. I scanned the shadows at the periphery of the lantern's glow, every sense alert. The barn loomed to our right, its broad double doors closed, the hayloft above gaping black. To our left lay open field, rolling off toward dark hills. Nothing moved out there that I could see. The sheep nearest to us skittered away, pressing against the far fence. Easy now, Father crooned softly, trying to soothe them. Over the din of their bleating, I caught another sound, a low rumble, like a distant growl, so low I felt it in my chest more than heard it. I whipped my head toward the barn. Did you hear that? I was. Father nodded, raising the rifle. We edged toward the barn doors, which were just slightly ajar, wide enough for a person to slip through. Had we left them like that? I couldn't recall. We keep hay and a couple of cows in there. It wouldn't do to have it open, especially not on a frigid night. Father reached out with the rifle barrel and nudged the door. It swung inward with a creak. Inside, all was darkness. Father thrust the lantern forward and I peered over his shoulder. The golden light revealed strewn hay, the outline of our old cow, Bruna in her stall, and beyond her the smaller shape of our calf. Bruna was shifting nervously, eyes rolling white. Something had clearly spooked her. I smelled a sharp tang of blood in the air, faint but distinct. Father inhaled sharply and handed me the lantern. "Stay here," he ordered in a terse whisper. Before I could protest, he stepped into the barn, rifle raised, and disappeared around Bruna's stall. I waited, lantern arm trembling. The sheep's cries had diminished a little, as if they sensed we were investigating. The silence that fell was almost worse. "Father," I called softly after a moment. No answer. Then abruptly I heard Father shout a curse, and the boom of the rifle discharged inside the barn. The explosion of sound was deafening in the enclosed space. Bruna bellowed in fear. I leapt forward, heart in my throat, nearly dropping the lantern. Father stumbled back into view, waving his arm, his face a mix of anger and bewilderment. "Back! Get back!" he yelled at me. He rushed out, slamming the barn door shut behind him with a crack. "What is it? What happened?" I cried, grabbing his free arm. The reek of gunpowder hung in the air. His eyes were wild. Something in there I only caught a glimpse. He panted. "It jumped out the back window when I fired." Without another word, he pushed past me, circling around the barn, toward the rear, where a small high window led out to the fields. I followed close behind, struggling to keep the lantern from swaying too wildly. We found the back window shattered. It was scarcely larger than a man's torso, The wooden slats were splintered and hanging off their hinges. Father held up a hand for silence. We listened. In the distance, across the snowy field, there was a shape moving fast, too fast to be a human. It streaked toward the tree line and vanished. It was dark and low, but its speed and size were astonishing, like a black arrow in the night, far larger than a fox or dog. In a few blinks, it was gone. My mouth had gone dry again. Father's hands shook as he reloaded the rifle with clumsy fingers. "Jesus save us," he muttered under his breath. We trudged back to the barn in stunned silence. Father held a lantern now, and I saw sweat shining on his brow despite the cold. Inside the barn, the lantern light fell on a scene that sent a chill through me. One of our 2 cows was lying oddly on her side in the straw, and it took me a moment to understand why. Her neck was twisted at a gruesome angle, and her hindquarters were simply gone. Ragged flesh and bone glistened where her lower body should have been. A pool of blood was spreading across the dirt floor, still warm and steaming in the frigid air. I gagged and stumbled back, nearly slipping. The cow had been ripped apart, as if by some enormous predator. No bear or wildcat existed in these parts that could do such a thing, and in mere moments, silently, yet the proof lay before us in horrifying clarity. Bruna, miraculously, was unharmed, but crazed with fear, straining against her rope. Father cursed again, under his breath this time, perhaps unwilling to alarm Mother or the children if they overheard. He bent to examine the remains, but there was little to be done. "It took most of her with it," he whispered, voice tight with shock. "The thing, no, let's call it what it was. The Yule Cat, for I had no doubt now, had stolen into our barn, slaughtered a healthy year-old heifer, and leapt out through a window carrying 100 weight of flesh, as easily as a cat carries a mouse, and we had almost caught it in the act." I felt lightheaded. The lantern light swirled as black spots danced in my vision. Father grabbed my shoulder hard. "Steady, boy," he said. He was pale beneath his beard, but his voice had regained some of its resolve. "We have to get back to the house now." He didn't need to tell me twice. We secured Bruna as best we could. She was still wild-eyed, but the barn door was now shut and latched. The sheep in the pen were quieter, though they huddled together, their breath fogging the air in quick bursts. On our way out, something in the snow caught my eye. "Father, wait." I angled the lantern down. There in the fresh snow by the barn's back corner was a footprint unlike any I'd seen, a paw print to be precise, massive, pressed deep into the crust, 4 toe pads, and the impression of claws, each the length of my longest finger. I knelt and placed my hand beside it. The paw print dwarfed my spread hand. There was a smudge of blood at its edges, bits of brown fur, cow fur stuck in the crust. Another print was a stride away, and another, heading off toward the field where we'd seen the shape retreat. They were spaced far apart, as if whatever left them was running at an incredible speed or perhaps leaping. Father's face tightened as he looked. Without a word, he grabbed my coat sleeve and tugged. We left the prince and hurried back, practically jogging the last stretch to our house. Father kept the rifle in one hand, lantern in the other, eyes scanning all around. I carried a hay fork I'd snatched up as a meager weapon, though I doubted it would do much good. We slammed the door shut behind us and bolted it. Mother was already standing in the center of the room, eyes wide with fear. She had heard the shot, no doubt, and the commotion. Rosa and Arnie were awake too now, peeking out from their bedding with frightened faces. What happened? Ingvar, what did you see? Mother demanded, using Father's name, which she rarely did. She moved toward him, hands clenched at her throat. Father set down the lantern and gently pushed her back toward the children. We think it might be out there, he said quietly, trying not to panic the little ones. His attempt at calm failed. The tremor in his voice was audible. One of the cows. Something got it. Mother gasped, one hand flying to her mouth. The children began to cry softly, though they likely didn't grasp exactly what was wrong. I went to the window and lifted the cover just a hair to peer out. Only darkness and swirling snow at some point. Flurries had begun drifting down, and the wind was picking up again. Our footprints and those monstrous paw prints would soon be obscured. Father gently ushered Mother to sit with the children, then came to stand by me at the window. In the dim amber glow of the hearth, we looked like ghosts reflected in the glass. He spoke in a low tone meant only for me. We must keep watch the rest of the night, he murmured. If that thing comes here, he didn't finish. He didn't need to. We both knew what it wanted. It had taken the cow's flesh for a meal. But the lore was clear. Its true prey were people, especially those it judged unworthy by the old custom. And I was the only one in our household shining like a beacon of misfortune, clad entirely in last year's worn clothes. I thought of the way the cat's eyes had gleamed in Mother's stories, how she said it could peer into a house and single out who hadn't gotten a gift. I imagined those eyes now, out there in the dark, searching for me. A sudden thump on the roof jolted me from my thoughts. It was followed by a scraping sound, like something heavy dragging across the turf and wooden beams overhead. Snow dislodged by the impact slid off the eaves past the window. Mother let out a stifled scream. Rosa and Arnie clung to her, sobbing openly now. Father backed away from the window, aiming the rifle upwards. My heart thundered in my chest. The roof of our house was low and slanted. An agile man could climb up there, or an agile beast. For a tense moment we all stayed stock still, listening. The only sound was the crackle of the fire and the children's muffled whimpers. Then came another thud, this time at the door, rattling it on its hinges. The whole cottage seemed to shake. The thud was followed by a deep resonant growl that vibrated the air. It was as if thunder had taken form and growled like a lion right outside our threshold. Mother screamed properly this time. Father bellowed, "Get back." He shoved us all toward the far corner, away from the door. I grabbed a poker from beside the hearth, hands slick with sweat despite the cold. A second heavy blow fell on the door and we heard the unmistakable sound of wood splintering. The iron bolt held for now, but the door frame groaned. Another strike like that, and the door would burst inward. I caught a glimpse of something through the small window, only a portion of our porch illuminated by the moon which had just emerged from the clouds. A huge dark shape moved there, blocking the faint light. It was crouched, coiled with muscle like a panther about to spring. My mind struggled to accept the scale. The creature's back rose nearly to the top of our doorframe. The Yule Cat had come, and it was trying to batter its way into our home. "Take the children to the pantry," Father barked at Mother. The pantry was a tiny room at the back, little more than a closet, but it had a sturdy door. She didn't argue. Clutching Rosa and Arnie each by hand, she hurried them into the pantry and shut the door. I heard the scrape of her sliding the inside bar across it, securing. Father and I were left alone in the main room, facing the door. He nodded to me grimly and cocked the rifle, aiming squarely where the center of the door was. We both knew he had only a couple of shots before the ammunition was spent. If those failed, well, a hay fork and a fire poker would be poor defense. "Maybe it will give up," I whispered, voice quavering with a hope I didn't truly feel. As if in answer, a snarling hiss came from just beyond the threshold, a sound of impatience and hunger. The creature's claws scraped down the wood, testing, seeking purchase. Long, deliberate scratches carved through the planks. My blood ran cold at the realization that it was toying with us, perhaps enjoying our fear. With shocking suddenness, the next blow came not to the door but to the window. The glass shattered inward in an explosion of shards. I threw up an arm to shield my face, feeling a couple of bits slice into my sleeve and skin. A feral, stinging scent like ammonia and blood wafted in through the new opening. In the flickering light of the lamp and hearth, a huge black paw groped through the broken window frame. It was bigger than any animal's limb I had ever seen, easily the size of a human forearm, covered in coarse dark fur. The paw flexed, and claws like curved knives glinted. They hooked onto the windowsill, wood squealing as they sank in and tore it asunder as easily as peeling an orange. Father shouted an oath and fired. The gun's blast lit the room in stark orange for an instant. The report was deafening. Wood splinters exploded where the shot hit the window frame. Had he struck the beast, a piercing yowl answered, some combination of pain and fury. The paw vanished from the window. For a heartbeat there was silence, but for our ragged breathing, my ears rang from the gunshot. Father hastily began to reload for the third time that night. The last 2 shells he had. His hands shook so badly I feared he'd drop the cartridges. I went to help him, but before I could, the entire door frame shuddered violently. Another slam from outside, then another like a battering ram. Crack, the bolt tore free of the wood. The door flew open in a spray of splinters banging against the wall. A rush of frigid air extinguished the oil lamp and dimmed the fire, plunging us into near darkness. In the open maw of the doorway stood a silhouette that filled it completely, the outline of a gigantic cat, its fur spiked and bristling, 2 burning yellow eyes fixated on us, narrowing to slits against the sudden draft. Behind the creature, the moon had broken through the clouds, framing it in cold silver light. Snowflakes whirled around its hulking form as it crouched on the threshold. The Yule Cat forced its head and shoulders into our cottage, a hellish vision of matted black fur and blood-stained fangs. It let out a hissing snarl, squeezing its bulk through the shattered entry. The creature's eyes burned like lanterns in the gloom. Narrow and seething with malevolence, it fixed its predatory stare upon us, lips drawing back to reveal fangs as long as daggers. For an instant, the reek of carrion on its breath choked the air as it let out a rumbling growl. My mind went blank with terror. The Yule Cat was even more terrifying in our tiny home than it had been in the barn. It seemed to fill the whole space with darkness and death. The firelight played over its muscular form, highlighting patches of wet crimson that clung to its claws and matted fur. Gruesome remnants of poor Broom. Its tail lashed, knocking a chair aside as if it were a twig. Fire fired the second shot directly at the beast's head from barely 5 paces away. I saw the muzzle flare, heard the crack, but unbelievably, the Yule Cat only flinched to the side with reflexes too quick to follow. The shot must have grazed it. A line of blood appeared along its jowl, and it let out a screeching hiss that made the hair on my neck stand up. In the next heartbeat, it lunged into the room with a bound, faster than such a large thing should move. "Run, Father roared, using his body as a shield and swinging the rifle like a club at the cat's face. Claws sliced through his coat and shirt in 3 terrible strokes, spraying blood. With a strangled cry, he fell to the floor, blood pouring from 3 parallel gashes across his torso. "Pop!" I screamed. Time seemed to slow as I saw him crumple, red blossoming across his chest. A raw fury and terror surged through me. I rushed forward without thinking, jabbing with my iron poker at the monstrous silhouette. The poker struck the cat's shoulder and glanced off as if hitting a stone wall. The creature's attention snapped to me. It did not yet advance, but crouched low, blocking the doorway, tail lashing wildly and smashing a chair to splinters. Those eyes, those hellish, intelligent eyes, locked onto me, and I felt an icy wave of dread. In that moment, I understood that it recognized me as the one it sought, the one lacking a new garment, the one who had not earned the right to be safe. It moved deliberately, almost leisurely, as if savoring the moment. Massive paws stepped fully inside onto our wooden floor, claws clicking like knives against a cutting board. Behind it, the wind howled through the open door, sending snow eddying. The fire in the hearth sputtered, shadows quivering around us. My mind raced desperately. Father lay motionless, possibly dead or dying, only a few feet away from one of the cat's huge paws. I had nothing left but the now bent fireplace poker. Mother and the children were trapped in the pantry. If the beast could smash the front door, it would tear through that flimsy pantry door in seconds. And it would, unless I did something. The Yule Cat lowered its head and emitted a rumbling growl, a sound so deep it was felt more than heard. It stepped over Father's prone form, prowling closer to me. I backed away, keeping the poker up, although I knew it was futile. In the corner of my eye, I saw Mother's terrified face through a crack in the pantry door. Rosa clutching her arm. I had to get the creature away from them, away from the house entirely. Here, I shouted suddenly, waving my arm. My voice cracked with terror, but I put every ounce of strength into it. Here I am, you devil, come and get me. I hurled the poker directly at its face. The iron rod bounced off its broad forehead with a dull thunk. It wasn't enough to injure, but it did succeed in enraging the beast. The Yule Cat snarled, ears flattening against its skull. In 2 bounds, it closed the space between us. I dove sideways at the last instant, as a giant paw swiped where I'd been standing, splintering the wooden support beam behind me as if it were kindling. I felt the rush of air as those claws whipped past my back, missing me by inches. Before it could wheel around, I seized the moment. Heart pounding, I sprang toward the open door, the only escape. Drawing a deep breath, I hurled myself out into the winter night, not even feeling the bite of the cold in my panic. Behind me, I heard the cat let out a roar of fury at having its prey suddenly bolt. Over here, you monster! I screamed once more into the darkness, hoping to lure it fully outside and away from my family. Then I ran. I ran as I had never run before, adrenaline and sheer terror fueling my legs. The snow was up to my calves, slowing me, but I half leapt, half stumbled across the yard toward the open fields. A thunderous roar erupted behind me, and I knew the chase was on. I dared a quick glance over my shoulder as I reached the first fence. The Yule Cat burst from the doorway of our home, leaping over the porch steps and landing in the snow with a spray of white powder. It paused only a split second, ears pricked forward as it fixed on me. Then it charged. Its hulking form moved with terrifying grace and speed, bounding on all fours, covering yards in each surge. The sight of it, a black leviathan on the snow, closing in, galvanized me to push even faster despite the dragging weight of the drift. I vaulted the low fence, nearly losing a boot in the process, and sprinted into the open field where just hours ago all had been calm and silent. Now the night was alive with deadly pursuit. The moon, free of clouds at last, lit the snow in a pale glow, throwing my fleeing shadow long ahead of me. But behind me, the shadow that followed was larger and growing larger still. I ran for my life. Each breath burned like fire in my lungs, and the bitter air stabbed my throat like a knife. The crunch of my frantic steps was nearly drowned out by the thudding footfalls behind me. I dared not look back, but I could sense the enormous shadow closing in, its snarls fueling my legs to pump even faster. The Yule Cat was only a dozen yards behind and gaining relentlessly. I could hear its panting breaths like bellows and the thud of its paws. In mere moments it would be upon me, and I realized with a sickening dread that I could not possibly outrun it to any shelter. The nearest neighbor's farm was a mile off. The only structures nearby were the craggy lava outcroppings and perhaps the old ice shed by the frozen creek at the edge of our property where we stored blocks of ice for summer. It was basically a small cellar dug into a mound, with walls of stacked stone, a low, sturdy structure. If I could reach it, maybe I could squeeze inside. The entrance was a narrow hobbit-like door. Perhaps the cat couldn't get through easily. It was a slim hope, but better than nothing. The creek and ice shed lay north, past the grazing field and near a cluster of basalt rocks. I veered in that direction, lungs burning from the frigid air. The change in course apparently surprised the cat momentarily, and I heard it snarl and adjust its path, claws scrabbling on the frozen crust of snow. Just ahead I could make out the mound of the ice house, a hump in the ground with a dark wooden door flush to the slope. I also realized with both relief and alarm that the creek beyond it was not entirely frozen over. I could hear the faint burble of water moving under a crust of ice, and patches of black water showed. Perhaps the spring feeding it still ran warm enough to prevent full freezing. That would be dangerous if I stepped wrong. I had no time to think further. With a mighty leap I cleared a half-buried rock and practically flung myself against the ice shed door. I yanked it open, hinges mercifully free of ice, though the door was so small I'd have to crawl to get in. I stooped and scrambled in head first, pulling the door closed behind me, just as I felt a rush of air and a heavy impact on its outer side. The cat had pounced. The door shuddered violently, nearly ripped from my grasp, but I braced my back against it from the inside, feet planted on the icy floor of the shed. The structure was frigid and dark. Only a bit of moonlight came through a few chinks. I could see my own white breath. Blocks of ice glinted faintly in stacks around the cramped interior. Outside, the Yule Cat let out a screech of frustration. Claws scratched at the wood, carving long furrows that I could see poking through as the tips broke through the door's inner surface. I pressed with all my might, praying the wood would hold a little longer. The beast snarled and battered the shed, causing snow to drift down from the roof with each thump. It couldn't fully fit its bulk in front of the small door, which gave me a tiny advantage. Perhaps instinct told it to try a different tactic. The scratching ceased. All went quiet, except for my heaving breath and pounding heart. Then I heard a new sound, a heavy dragging, shifting of weight atop the mound. I looked up just in time to see the ceiling above crack. A set of claws was piercing straight through the sod roof. The tip of a huge paw broke through, then withdrew. It was trying to collapse the structure from above. I quickly rolled aside just as another massive paw crashed through, sending stones and dirt tumbling. The paw grabbed at the air inside blindly. Swipe. I pressed myself against the icy wall, eyes wide in the gloom. The Yule Cat raked its claws back and forth, tearing a larger hole in the roof. Soon it would be able to stick its whole leg in, perhaps tear off an entire section. Desperate, I searched the small space for anything useful. My fingers brushed a shard of ice, sharp as glass. Without thinking too much, I seized it. At that moment, the cat's paw came thrusting in again, groping for me. With a cry of mingled fear and fury, I slashed at it with the jagged ice shard. Miraculously, the improvised weapon bit into flesh. I felt it sink into one of the toes. The cat yowled, an unearthly sound, and the paw jerked back, the ice shard ripping out to clatter at my feet. A spatter of hot blood dripped through the roof hole, splashing onto my face and the front of my coat. It burned against my cold skin. I wiped it away, hands trembling. The cat roared and began assaulting the shed in earnest, now pounding and clawing. A new crack formed in the wall stones, pale light filtering through where the mortar crumbled. Realizing I would be crushed if I stayed, I made a snap decision, clutching another loose wedge of ice to my chest, more out of some instinct to not face the thing empty-handed. I waited for a brief lull in the onslaught. Then I kicked open the door and threw myself out, back into the night. The beast was partially atop the mound, one great paw digging where it had broken the roof, the rest of it slinking down around the sides. At the sudden sight of me emerging below, it reared back with startling agility, readying to pounce down. This time I did not run blind. Instead, I edged sideways, leading it toward the creek. If I could not outrun or outfight it, perhaps I could outsmart it, use the environment, that patch of thin ice and water ahead might be my only chance.
The Yule Cat snarled and leapt off the ruined ice shed, landing between me and the way back to the house, as if cutting off my retreat. It prowled toward me, more cautious now, tail lashing. I must have truly angered it with that ice wound. One of its forepaws left bloody tracks in the snow from the cut I gave it, though it didn't seem slowed by it much. Its eyes shone with murderous intent. I continued sidestepping until I felt the ground dip slightly. This was the bank of the creek. I dared not glance down, but I could hear the faint gurgle of water very close, and the crust of snow felt thinner and precarious underfoot. I held the block of ice out like a dagger, trying to ignore how my numb fingers could barely keep grip. "Come on then," I muttered, voice shaking. "Come and get me, you bastard." Whether it understood the words or just my defiant tone, the Yule Cat's ears pinned back and it charged. Clearly done with games, it came straight at me, head low, jaws open in a soundless snarl. I tensed, waiting for the last possible moment, as it closed the gap in a blur. Just as those jaws lunged for me, I hurled myself to the side, toward the creek. The beast's momentum carried it forward. There was a tremendous crash and a splintering sound as the monster's weight met the fragile ice covering the water. The frozen surface gave way beneath it, engulfing the front half of the cat in black, frigid water. A screeching howl of rage erupted as the Yule Cat thrashed, trying to find footing. Its hind legs scrambled on the bank while its forequarters were submerged. Water sprayed and ice shards flew as it heaved itself partially out again, but the snow and mud on the bank, slicked by overflow, offered poor purchase. Seizing my chance, I rushed forward with a shout and slammed my block of ice onto the beast's head as hard as I could. It was like smashing a bottle. The ice shattered on impact and the cat roared, more in anger than pain, but the blow did make it slip back a few inches into the water. Its eyes locked onto me with such hatred that I recoiled instinctively, falling backward onto the snow. The Yule Cat was now hauling itself out by inches, water cascading off its black fur. The creek wasn't deep,
maybe up to its chest, but deep enough to slow it momentarily. I scrambled away on all fours, my legs nearly giving out from exhaustion and the burning cold that was seeping through my thin old clothes. I realized dimly that I had led myself now onto the same treacherous ice. A crack spider webbed under me, and I rolled aside just as it collapsed. My right leg plunged into numbing cold up to the knee before I pulled free and found solid ground again, soaked and shivering. The cat gained the bank with a final mighty lunge. It stood, water streaming off its black coat, sides heaving. In the moonlight it looked like some elemental force, an embodiment of winter's hunger and wrath. Steam rose from its fur in the frosty air. It shook itself once, droplets flying, then fixed me with those eyes. I lay a short distance away, tangled in reeds and panting. There was nowhere left to run. It prowled toward me slower now, possibly tired from the struggle, but no less deadly. I felt strangely calm, the adrenaline almost spent. This was it, I thought. I have done all I could. At least the monster was away from the house, and my family might live. The thought gave me a shard of solace, as the beast loomed over me, its shadow swallowing me up. I closed my eyes, waiting for the final blow. In the silence I could hear the drip of water from its fur and the faint crackle of ice in the creek. My mind latched onto a memory, a Christmas Eve many years ago. My grandmother bouncing me on her knee by the fire, reciting the old poem of the Yule Cat in her creaking voice. All knew he hunted people and he did not want mice. She had tickled me under the chin then, pretending her hand was the cat's paw, and I had squealed in half-delighted terror. But those who got new clothes for Yule stayed out of the cat's grasp. A bitter smile tugged at my lips at the irony. No new clothes for me, and thus here I was, about to become a legend myself. A cautionary tale of the boy who didn't get a gift and was taken by Grila's pet. Suddenly, through the ringing in my ears, another sound emerged, a distant rising peal that drifted on the night air, the ringing of church bells. I opened my eyes in confusion. Was this a hallucination in my final moment? No, the bells were real, and close enough to be heard clearly in the stillness of early dawn. It must be the church in the next village tolling the hour. What hour? Could it be midnight, or perhaps the first bells of Christmas Day morning? The Yule Cat heard it too. Its ears pricked and its snarl paused. The bell's notes were rich and resonant, carrying across the snow. Another joined and another, a carillon of celebration far off yet clear. The great cat shook its head as if irritated by the sound. I saw something flicker in its luminous eyes, uncertainty, pain. It took a step back from me, huffing, tail lashing erratic. The bells continued to ring, a cascade of sacred music defying the bleak night and this unholy creature. Snarling, the Yule Cat seemed to decide it had enough. Perhaps it sensed that dawn was near, or perhaps some ancient bane in those consecrated chimes repelled it. Whatever the reason, with one last hateful glare directed at me, it turned and bounded off into the darkness. I watched in disbelief, as its huge form receded, first a powerful leap, then another, each carrying it dozens of feet, until it was once more a shadow among shadows, melting into the distant line of hills and black trees. The night swallowed it. I remained where I was for several heartbeats, afraid to move or even breathe, lest it be a trick. But the only motion came from the gently falling snow, and the only sound from the dying echoes of the bells. A creeping pink light had begun to touch the sky. To the east, the first hint of Christmas dawn. I was alive. My entire body began to shake, and suddenly I was sobbing deep, gulping sobs of relief and exhaustion. I tilted my face up to the paling sky and let out a cracked laugh that melted into tears. We had survived the night. I had survived. The long darkness was ending, and I was alive to see it, shivering violently now that the terror was ebbing and the cold truly set in. I slowly got to my feet. My soaked trouser leg was half frozen, and I limped as I began staggering back toward home. Every part of me ached, and my mind felt strangely hollow. The field I crossed bore the scars of our battle, churned in bloody snow, a trail of massive paw prints, leading away, shattered ice by the creek. When I reached our yard, the front door hung ajar, dangling from one twisted hinge. Inside, everything was quiet. "Mother? Father?" I croaked, stepping through the ruined doorway. The interior was a wreck, furniture overturned, blood smeared on the floor where Father had fallen. Father, my heart clenched. There he lay, impossibly still alive. He was propped against the wall near the hearth, the rifle in pieces by his side. At the sound of my voice, his head lolled and he looked at me, eyes glassy with pain but widening in relief. A hastily wrapped bandage, perhaps torn from a sheet, covered his chest wounds, though blood seeped through. "Einar, you're alive," he rasped. I rushed to him and knelt, fresh tears springing to my eyes. "Father, you need help," I said, unsure where to start. Mother emerged then from the pantry, the children clinging to her skirt. All three flew to my side in a flood of sobs and exclamations. Mother embraced me fiercely, despite my wet and blood-stained state, as if to assure herself I was real. Rosa and Arnie babbled tearfully that they thought I was gone forever. "There's no time, fetch me water and linens," Mother said suddenly, snapping into practicality through her sobs. She could see Father's condition was dire. I nodded and moved on autopilot, drawing water from our indoor barrel and heating it over the rekindled fire, which Mother had apparently tended while waiting. We worked together to clean and dine Father's wounds more properly. The gashes were deep, but mercifully not immediately mortal. No organ struck, just muscle. He winced as we tightened a fresh bandage, but managed a weak chuckle. "If that's the best that devil can do, he ought to be ashamed," he joked feebly. No one laughed, but tears of relief ran down Mother's face at his attempt at humor. The children hovered, sniffling but eager to help. I sent Rosa to fetch my coat from where I'd dropped it, and Arnie stoked the fire higher to banish the chill that permeated the house. Dawn came slowly but surely, lightening the interior with a soft blue glow. In that gentle light, the destruction seemed less catastrophic. It was Christmas morning, and we were alive. That alone felt miraculous. Father dozed fitfully by the hearth, and Mother gave the children tasks to keep them busy, sweeping up broken glass and setting chairs upright. I stepped outside to survey the broader damage in the new daylight. Our door was ruined, the barn window smashed, one cow dead, but it could have been far worse. As I looked over the expanse of snow toward the horizon, the rising sun painted the sky in stripes of pink and gold. The same serene landscape that had looked so menacing at night now seemed almost tranquil, belying the terror that had prowled hours before. I noticed movement out by the fence. To my surprise, 3 figures were approaching neighbors from the next farm, armed with pitchforks and an old musket. They must have heard the commotion, or seen the strange lights and sounds from afar, and come to check on us at first light. I went out to meet them, raising a hand in greeting to show we were safe. Perhaps some of them had rung those bells as a warning or rallying call. Later there would be stories to tell, frightful, wondrous stories of the Yule Cat's visit. There would be disbelief and then awe, as they saw the evidence. The claw marks like scythes raked across our door, the tracks, the slaughtered cow. Superstition would turn to conviction, and the old folk tales would be whispered with renewed fervor. Our family would become both cautionary tale and fortunate example. We faced the beast and lived to speak of it. But in that moment, as Mother gently called me back inside to warmth and family, I felt only a profound gratitude. Gratitude for the simple fact that I could step back over that threshold and hug my loved ones, feeling the solidness of their living bodies. Gratitude for the faint peal of bells that still echoed in my mind, whether by luck or divine grace. They had marked the Yule Cat's retreat and my salvation. Before I turned to go in, I looked one last time at the horizon, where the sun, pale as a new candle flame, was inching above the snowy earth. Somewhere out there, I knew, the Yule Cat still roamed, perhaps nursing its wounded paw and pride in some dark lair beneath the lava fields or high mountain caves. Perhaps it was slinking back to Grila's shadow, to wait another year until the next Christmas season, when it would resume its dreadful hunt. We would be ready. Never again would I, or any of us, face Yule night, unprotected or unprepared. Already, in the back of my mind, I was planning how to ensure extra wool for next year, how to see that no neighbor's child went without a new garment. The Yule Cat's evil had ironically kindled something good in us, a determination to work hard and to take care of one another, so that when it prowled again, it would find no easy prey. I stepped inside and pushed the remnants of the door closed, as best I could against the lingering cold. Rosa ran to drape a blanket over my shoulders, and Arnie offered me his precious new scarf for my neck, insisting I take it. I wrapped the warm red wool around me gratefully. Mother handed me a mug of hot broth, and then went to tend to Father, who gave me a tired thumbs up from his resting spot. In the hushed peace that follows terror, we sat together by the fire. The worst was over. Outside, daylight brightened, and I knew that the cruel visitor of the night had slunk back into the realm of legend for now. As I sipped the broth, Rosa laid her head on my lap and whispered, "I thought the Yule Cat got you." "Not this time," I replied softly, stroking her hair. My voice was gentle but firm, for myself as much as for her. We faced him and we're still here. We won. In that quiet Christmas morning, as the light of day banished the last clinging shadows, our little home stood strong against the darkness. The Yule Cat had come and gone, and though its eerie cries might haunt my dreams for years to come, I took comfort knowing that at least for this Yule, the beast had been kept at bay, and we had each safe and alive to greet the dawn. Later that day, a handful of our neighbors gathered at our farm to help us begin repairing and to share in the miracle of our survival. Margaret crossed herself as she stepped through our shattered doorway. Her eyes roamed over the gouges in the wood and the bloodstain. She limped straight to me and folded me into her arms, surprising me with her strength. "I should have made you keep that mitten on, my boy," she whispered, voice trembling. I managed a tired smile and pulled the blue and white mitten from my pocket to show her. "I have it," I croaked, "and I won't be letting it go." Fresh tears filled her eyes as she patted my cheek. Then she went to help Mother tend to Father. Other neighbors fanned out to assess the damage. They helped secure a temporary door and cleaned up the broken glass and splintered wood. Old Jan, our closest farmer friend, inspected the massive paw prints still visible in a sheltered patch of snow, and shook his head in wonder, muttering prayers under his breath. Word spread quickly through the valley that the dreaded Yule Cat had visited our farm and been driven away. Those neighbors who had scoffed at the legend the day before came by with wide apologetic eyes to see the proof for themselves. In the afternoon, Mother ladled out bowls of hot stew for everyone who had come to help. We sat around the hearth, some on chairs, others on crates or the hearthstones, while I recounted the events of the night as calmly as I could manage. It felt surreal to tell it, like describing a nightmare I had woken from. But the bandages on Father's chest and the ruins of our front door were undeniable reality. As I described the moment the Yule Cat broke into our home, the room fell silent save for the crackling fire and a few muffled gasps. When I finished the tale with the ringing of the bells at dawn, Margaret quietly crossed herself again and whispered, "Praise be to God." Our listeners responded in their own ways. Some shook their heads in disbelief, only to be convinced by the evidence right in front of them. Others took it in solemnly as if hearing confirmation of a faith they'd secretly held all along. In the years ahead, the story of that night would be told and retold in our valley, passed down as both a warning and a testament. We made sure no child of ours would ever forget the winter we battled the Yule Cat, or the lesson that even the longest night can be conquered by courage and love. By evening, the house was tidied. A sturdy plank door from Jan's farm had been hung to replace our broken one, and Father was resting more comfortably, propped up with pillows and sipping broth. Our neighbors departed one by one, their well wishes and lingering expressions of awe warming us more than any hearth. Mother saw them off with bundles of bread and cheese as thanks, though they wouldn't accept more than a token for all they'd done. In truth, they said, knowing that the valley's children were safe from the Yule Cat this year was thanks enough. That night, our little family huddled together in the front room, unwilling to be far apart. The storm had passed, leaving a still, starry sky overhead. Through the window's new panes, I saw countless stars winking into existence. A faint ribbon of green aurora shimmered on the horizon, painting the snow in unearthly hues, a silent celebration from the heavens, it seemed. After our night of terror, Father's arm lay across my shoulders as we sat on the settle bench, with Mother tucked under his other arm. The children curled up on our laps, already half asleep. From the long, emotional day, we spoke little. Nothing more needed to be said. The worst had come to pass, and we were still here. Before retiring, Mother insisted we say an extra prayer of thanks. Father, who normally grumbled about long prayers, squeezed her hand and nodded in agreement. We stood together by the hearth, heads bowed, as she whispered, "Thank you, Lord, for keeping us safe through the darkness and delivering us into the light." As we banked the fire and prepared to go to sleep, Mother paused to fetch something from her sewing basket. It was the blue and white mitten Margaret had given me, and which I had so stubbornly refused the day before. Mother hung it carefully above the mantel, right beside the wool stockings where we'd placed our small Yule gifts. It looked almost like a decoration, innocent and cheerful, yet, to us, it had become a symbol of life and luck. We all smiled at the sight. That Christmas night, we did not fear shadows at the window or claws at the door. We knew the Yule Cat was out there somewhere, perhaps nursing its pride, perhaps slinking off to whatever lair it crawled from. But it was not here. It would not trouble our home again. Not this year. And if it ever dared, we would be ready. I fell asleep to the sound of Father's gentle snores and Mother's soft humming from her rocking chair. She refused to leave his side. For the first time in many nights, I did not dream of a monstrous black shape or glowing eye. Instead, I dreamed of the bells at dawn, of light breaking through darkness, and of a great weight being lifted from our hearts. And as our fire crackled softly, and peace finally enveloped our home, I knew that whatever the future held, we would face it together, unafraid. Snow drifted gently outside our window as Christmas Eve came round again, 1 year after that terrible night. Inside our cottage, a warm glow bathed the room. The scent of roasting lamb mingled with the sweet spice of freshly baked bread. Laughter and the sound of Rosa's little wooden flute filled the air. This year none of us lacked a new garment. Mother had made sure of that, knitting through every spare moment of the past months. Father proudly wore a thick, new wool sweater of deep green, a gift from Mother. I had on a scarf I'd woven myself under her tutelage, its bright red yarn, a bold badge of our diligence. Rosa and Arnie pranced about in brand new coats, showing them off at every opportunity. As dusk approached, we all felt a nervous flutter, remembering from time to time one of us would glance at the door or the roof reflexively, but whenever the fear crept in, we banished it with action, feeding the fire, singing a lively carol, embracing one another. We set the table with a proper Christmas feast. Neighbors had joined us earlier in the day, with baskets of treats and hugs, turning what once was a scene of horror into a home of abundance and fellowship. Old Margaret had gifted each of us an extra pair of knitted socks, just to be safe, she said with a wink. We accepted them gratefully, and each of us wore those socks tonight. When the clock struck 6, Father opened our door on purpose and stepped out onto the threshold with a lantern, if daring anything in the dark to approach. From the safety of the doorway we all followed, peering into the cold twilight. The world was utterly still. Not a single disturbed snowdrift or phantom shape troubled the yard. "See," Father said, smiling as he ushered us back in. "All is well." We believed him. We closed the door, not bolted in fear as last year, but gently latched against the winter chill and gathered around the hearth. That night we ate, sang, and even found the courage to tell a certain old ghost story or two. It made us shiver, but we told it with respect rather than dread. The Yule Cat had tested us and we had prevailed. Now it was part of our family's lore, a reminder of a dark time that taught us the value of unity and perseverance. Before bed, little Arnie placed a humble plate of smoked meat just outside our front door for the cat, in case he's hungry, he explained. We all exchanged glances and let him do it. It was his way of feeling safe, and truth be told, it made us smile. We went to sleep that Christmas Eve with full stomachs and full hearts. No scratching came at our door. No nightmares plagued our dreams. Outside, perhaps in some far-off hollow, the Yule Cat roamed beneath the moon. But not here, not this night. In the morning we found Arnie's plate empty. Maybe a stray dog had taken the morsel. Or perhaps, just perhaps, the Yule Cat had accepted our simple peace offering and moved on. We would never know for sure, but as we stood together in the bright Christmas Day sun, we felt no fear. We had learned to respect the old tales, but not to live in terror of them. And as our family, stronger and more bonded than ever, celebrated the holiday, we knew that whatever future winters brought, we would face them together, unafraid. And in that fragile peace I told myself, the cat did not win tonight. The story did not swallow us whole. We are still here, and if we are still here, we can keep weaving, we can keep giving, we can keep claiming the unclaimed. We can keep tightening the seams of community so the monster has no place to slip through. I closed my eyes, and in the darkness behind my eyelids, I saw not teeth, not claws, but hands. Many hands. Knitting, sewing, weaving, holding. And slowly as sleep took me, the purr beneath the earth faded into distance, like thunder rolling away from the valley. For now, for this night, for this breath. And as you listen, wherever you are, wrapped in your own blankets and your own quiet, the story offers you the same thing it offered me, a slow exhale, a soft loosening of fear, the reminder that even in the deepest winter warmth can be made, stitch by stitch, breath by breath, until morning, before you drift fully into sleep. Tell me where you're listening from tonight, and if this story stayed with you, subscribe and wander through the other tales, waiting for you here. Good night, my midnight wanderer. Sleep well.